In 1917, the largest empire on Earth collapsed in a matter of months. The Russian Revolution would reshape the 20th century, creating the world's first communist state and inspiring revolutionary movements across the globe. This is the story of how a medieval autocracy became a socialist experiment that would endure for 7 decades. By 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ruled over 130 million people across 1/6 of the world's land surface. But beneath the golden domes of St. Petersburg's palaces, Russia was a nation of contradictions. While Western Europe embraced democracy and industrialization, Russia remained largely feudal. 90% of its people were peasants, many still bound to the land like medieval serfs. Nicholas himself was tragically unprepared for leadership. "I am not yet ready to be Tsar," he confided after his father's death in 1894. He ruled as an absolute monarch, believing his authority came directly from God. But industrialization was creating new social forces that would challenge his divine right to rule. The first cracks appeared in 1905. On January 9th, a peaceful procession of workers approached the Winter Palace to petition the Tsar for better working conditions. Imperial troops opened fire, killing hundreds in what became known as Bloody Sunday. This massacre shattered the people's faith in their little father and triggered the 1905 revolution. Though Nicholas was forced to grant a constitution and establish Russia's first parliament, the Duma, these reforms were grudging and incomplete. The fundamental contradictions of the Russian system remained unresolved, setting the stage for a far greater upheaval. That upheaval came with World War I. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia in 1914, Russia honored its Slavic alliances and mobilized its armies. Initially, the war was popular, with patriotic crowds cheering in the streets. But enthusiasm quickly turned to horror. Russian forces were catastrophically defeated at the Battle of Tannenberg, losing 2 entire armies. By 1915, Russian casualties exceeded 2 million. Soldiers fought with sticks when rifles ran out. The phrase, "the Russian steamroller," became a bitter joke as the army disintegrated under incompetent leadership and inadequate supplies. In September 1915, Nicholas made his most fateful decision. He took personal command of the army. This meant every military disaster now reflected directly on the Tsar himself. Meanwhile, his wife Alexandra increasingly dominated the government, relying heavily on the mysterious peasant mystic Rasputin. Rasputin had gained the royal family's trust by seemingly curing their hemophiliac son, but his crude behavior and political meddling made him the most hated man in Russia. In December 1916, nobles murdered him, hoping to save the monarchy. They were too late. By February 1917, Russia was collapsing. The economy had failed, food was scarce, and 3 years of war had cost 3 million Russian lives. On February 23rd, International Women's Day, textile workers in Petrograd began demonstrating for bread and peace. What started as economic protests quickly became political demands for the Tsar's abdication. For 4 days, the crowds grew larger as workers were joined by students, intellectuals, and crucially, soldiers. The decisive moment came when the Cossacks, the Tsar's most reliable troops, refused orders to charge the demonstrators. On March 2, 1917, isolated and abandoned, Nicholas II signed his abdication. 3 centuries of Romanov rule ended not with a bang, but with the scratching of a pen. The last Tsar of Russia had fallen without firing a shot in his own defense. Liberal politicians formed a provisional government promising democratic elections and civil liberties. But they made a crucial mistake. They decided to continue the war. Russia now had 2 competing centers of power, the official government and the Petrograd Soviet of workers and soldiers. Into this chaos stepped Vladimir Lenin. The 47-year-old revolutionary had spent 17 years in exile developing his theories. Germany, hoping to destabilize Russia further, allowed him to cross their territory in a sealed train car. His arrival changed everything. While other socialist leaders supported the provisional government and the war effort, Lenin immediately called for peace, land, and bread, exactly what the war-weary, hungry masses wanted to hear. His April theses outlined a radical program: immediate peace, land redistribution, and all power to the Soviets. The provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky, launched a disastrous military offensive in June 1917, hoping to restore national unity. Instead, Russian forces collapsed, losing 400,000 men in 3 weeks. Soldiers deserted en masse, many shooting their officers. In July, radical workers attempted to overthrow the government in the July days. The uprising failed, and Lenin was forced into hiding. But in August, General Lava Kornilov attempted a military coup. Desperate, Kerensky turned to the Bolsheviks for help. The Bolsheviks were released from prison and armed to defend the capital. Kornilov's coup collapsed without a battle, but the real winner was Lenin. The Bolsheviks had positioned themselves as defenders of the revolution while obtaining weapons and organization. By October, Lenin was convinced the moment had arrived. The planning fell to Leon Trotsky, the brilliant orator who had become Lenin's right-hand man. As chairman of the Soviet's Military Revolutionary Committee, Trotsky had legitimate authority to issue orders to the garrison. The October Revolution began quietly on October 24th. Bolshevik forces occupied key points in Petrograd: railway stations, telegraph offices, and government buildings. Most of the city went about its normal business, barely noticing the revolution happening around them. By evening on October 25th, the provisional government was trapped in the Winter Palace, defended only by military cadets and a women's battalion. At 9:40 p.m., the cruiser Aurora fired a blank shell, the signal for the final assault. Despite later Soviet mythology, the storming was relatively peaceful. The defenders simply gave up. Kerensky fled the city in a borrowed car. His remaining ministers were arrested. On October 26th, Lenin addressed the Congress of Soviets. "We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order." The Bolsheviks had won power in Russia's capital, but winning the country proved far more difficult. The October Revolution was really a coup in 2 cities. Across the vast empire, local commanders, ethnic minorities, and regional governments began forming their own armies. Russia plunged into civil war. Lenin's first decrees fulfilled his promises: an immediate armistice with Germany, worker control of factories, and land redistribution. But the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918 was controversial, forcing Russia to surrender vast territories to Germany. Lenin understood that without peace, the Bolsheviks couldn't survive. The revolution's darkest moment came in July 1918, when local Bolsheviks executed Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, and their 5 children as white armies approached their prison. The Romanov dynasty ended in abasement. Leon Trotsky built the Red Army from scratch, using former tsarist officers under Bolshevik supervision. By 1921, they had won, but at enormous cost. War communism led to industrial collapse and famine. Russia's economy shrank to a fraction of its pre-war size. Lenin's death in 1924 ended the revolutionary period. Joseph Stalin would ultimately inherit power, building a system that bore little resemblance to what the original revolutionaries envisioned. The Russian Revolution shaped the entire 20th century. The Soviet Union became a superpower. Communist parties spread globally, and the Cold War divided the world for decades. Yet in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, ending the experiment that began in 1917. Today, Russia flies the flag of the Tsars, not the hammer and sickle. The revolution that seemed to change everything forever has itself become history. But its questions remain urgent. When is revolution justified? Can violence create a better world? How do idealistic movements become oppressive systems? The revolution began with women demanding bread and ended with a global ideology. It promised paradise on earth and delivered both remarkable achievements and terrible suffering. Whether it succeeded or failed, the courage of ordinary people to challenge the existing order changed the world forever. Russia endures, its people endure, and the eternal questions raised by 1917 continue to shape our understanding of power, justice, and social change.